police, fire, medical.
I need emergency, please.
What?
Ambulance. Someone is hurt. Lacerate cuts.
Okay, who's cut?
Next door, who is this? It's a teenager.
Okay, male or female?
The girl or boy? I think it's a girl. They have a major cut to their neck.
Do you know what happened?
I don't know. My husband heard someone screaming and then we came outside.
Ma'am, do you know if this person was assaulted?
I don't know. We just came outside. They have a major wound to their neck and they're struggling to breathe.
Are they awake?
I don't think they're even responsive at this point.
Is she breathing?
I don't see any breath. Yes, breathing.
Okay. She is breathing, you say?
Yes, but struggling.
Ma'am, is the blood spurting or pouring out?
You know, it's all over the ground.
Okay, but is it spurting out or pouring out of the person?
It may have already. I don't think this person has any more blood. It looks like a knife wound.
Okay.
I don't think they're breathing anymore. I don't see them breathing. I don't think they're with us.
In a jealous rage, a killer stabbed his victim multiple times and attempted to sever her head before fleeing into the woods as someone stepped out of their home hearing the commotion. The killer left his victim to bleed to death. Why did he do it? And why were the warning signs ignored after his first victim? Before we begin, we would like to send our sincere condolences to the loved ones of Kay Baker, who fell victim to the abominable acts described in this case. Meet Kay Elizabeth Baker, a 43-year-old woman living in Lithia County, Florida, with her two sons. Kay was a third-grade math and science teacher at Cypress Creek Elementary School in Ruskin, beloved by her students and peers. It was on a quiet, warm spring night on May 28, 2022. Jonathan Figgins, who lives next door to Kay, was sleeping peacefully on his couch, his wife and children sound asleep upstairs. It was right after midnight when Mr. Figgins heard unsettling sounds that roused him from his sleep. The best he could describe what he heard was the sound of someone falling on the floor and then a female gasping for breath. Mr. Figgins first thought one of his daughters had fallen out of bed and hit the floor, but when he went upstairs to check, everyone was sound asleep in their beds. Upon investigating outside, Mr. Figgins spotted what he believed to be a teenage girl laying face down on the ground near his front yard. This woman later was identified as Kay Baker. Kay was lying in a pool of blood that appeared to be coming from around her neck. While checking the status of the injured woman, Mr. Figgins heard a sound from behind. He turned to hear a rustling sound that appeared to be coming from the wooded area behind his home, but he saw nothing. Mr. Figgins told his wife Ruth to call 911. By the time fire rescue and the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office deputies arrived, Kay was gone. The medical examiner who inspected Kay's body at the crime scene discovered that she had multiple stab wounds to her shoulders and neck. Kay's neck laceration was so extreme, detectives concluded that the attacker had intended to sever her head from her body. Deputies searched the perimeter of Kay's home. In the driveway, detectives found a gray Ford Focus. After running the tags, they found out that it belonged to a Matthew Terry. One window was open and the screen was knocked out. The room belonged to one of Kay's boys, neither of which were home that night. This window was facing the Figgins home. From the window, turning right led to the front yard area, the area where Kay had been found. Left led into the backyard, where drops of blood were discovered. Detectives were able to quickly obtain a search warrant to enter Kay's home. Inside the house, it was noticed that in the kitchen a single knife was missing from a butcher block knife set, and a cell phone had been left nearby. The knife missing from the set was a specialized paring knife called a bird's beak knife, given that name because of its 3-inch curved blade, which resembled a parrot's beak. The knife was never located. The The bathroom door frame had major damage, showing that someone had violently forced the door open at some point. The main bedroom showed recent signs of forced entry as well, and another cell phone was found on the nightstand. Deputies found the door to the child's room with the open window was locked, so they had to force the door open. They found no one inside the house. To follow the blood trail, deputies brought in a bloodhound. The scent led the dog into a thick wooded area behind the subdivision. After trailing the scent for a while, the bloodhound led the deputy to an area of woods off of Lithia Pinecrest Road. There, they found a patch of grass covered in blood. Knowing there was a good chance that the perpetrator was nearby, deputies decided to bring out a different canine unit, a Belgian Malinois, one trained to attack and apprehend criminals. Deputies led the dog towards the blood found by the bloodhound and shouted out warnings that they had a dog that will bite if whoever is out there doesn't come out. After a moment, the dog begins barking and attempts to charge forward. They soon found Matthew hiding in the tall grass and bushes. He was wearing only a t-shirt and his underwear. His clothes were soaked in blood. Matthew had injuries on his neck and was having difficulty walking. After apprehending Matthew, police ended their chase and Matthew was arrested on first-degree murder charges. May 27th marked the last day of the school season. To celebrate, Kay went to the Landing Bar and Grill that night with her boyfriend, 47-year-old Matthew Terry. At some point, Kay and Matthew got up to use the restrooms. Kay came out first and happened to run into a friend of hers, Kelly Andrews. Excited to bump into each other, Kay starts doing a little happy dance. As Kay is doing her little happy dance, a man, unknown to either Kay or Kelly, walked by and playfully mimicked Kay's happy dance as he passes by. This lasts for maybe 4 seconds. This interaction between Kay and the stranger occurred right as Matthew was walking out of the restroom. Matthew immediately jumped to the conclusion that Kay had danced with another man and became furious. At the bar, Matthew starts an argument with Kay, angrily accusing her of dancing with another man. This accusation is heard by both Kelly and a nearby bar patron. Matthew and Kay left the bar and headed home around 11:30 p.m. It was about a 90-minute drive back to their home, and Matthew continued to argue with Kay about dancing with another man. Kay decided to call Kelly and have her tell Matthew that she wasn't dancing with a passing stranger. Kelly overheard Kay tell Matthew to stop being stupid. After the phone call, Kelly received a text message from Kay at 11:56 p.m. that read, "LOL, sorry for that, so dumb, all good now." About 30 minutes later, Mr. Figgins found Kay bleeding to death in his yard. Investigators at the crime scene believed Matthew had attempted to murder Kay while he was in a drunken rage. They believe he stabbed her multiple times and attempted to remove her head before she found a way to escape through a window and made her way into her neighbor's yard. Kay was not Matthew's first victim. He had a criminal history of violence towards women, which Kay was well aware of. 5 years before Matthew murdered Kay in a jealous rage, he was in a relationship with a woman named Michelle Rogers. Matthew and Michelle had met over a dating app in 2015. They both lived in Michigan at the time. Michelle lived there with her 5-year-old son. Matthew had spent a few years in the Marines. Around the time he met Michelle, he was working as a wrestling coach. After dating casually for a few months, Michelle decided that she wanted to end the relationship. That is, until she found out that she was pregnant. For the baby, Michelle thought it best to make her relationship with Matthew work. Soon, they moved in together. But all too soon, it became apparent that Matthew was abusive and violent. These behaviors worsened when he drank. Once, he threw a cast-iron pan at Michelle while she was holding their infant son. Another time, Matthew picked up her cat and threw it against the wall. On nights when he was both angry and drunk, Matthew would show up at Michelle's apartment and bang on her door saying that he knew she was sleeping with another man and would demand to be let in. During that time, Matthew worked for a local internet provider. One day, he told one of his co-workers he wanted to stab the out of Michelle. The co-worker took Matthew's statement as a way of venting and thought nothing more of it. But a few months later, on March 17, 2017, it was brought to light just how serious Matthew was. Matthew and Michelle had gone out bar hopping with a few of their friends that day. Around 6 p.m., Michelle was ready to go home. She went looking for Matthew, who happened to be at a bar adjacent to the one that she was in. Michelle found him so drunk he was slurring his words and stumbling. Michelle was so upset by how drunk Matthew had allowed himself to get that she went home and left him at the bar. Around 8 p.m., Matthew comes knocking at the back door.
He knocked at that door and I proceeded to let him in. At that time he was very clearly drunk. He couldn't walk straight. He seemed just very, it's hard to describe, but just you could kind of sense his energy as being very frustrated or angry or upset. Just in general, just a general sense.
So as the kids say, you got a vibe off of him that he seemed angry?
Correct.
Did you do anything in that moment?
I did not. I went and I sat back down on the couch where I was when he showed up.
And what does he do?
So he went into the kitchen, and I believe he was making a sandwich. He was making some kind of food at the counter, and the kitchen and the living room area is pretty open. So as I was sitting on the couch, I could see him. So I remember sitting on the couch watching TV, and then the next thing I remember is standing behind the couch, and I'm looking at him in the kitchen, and I remember him coming around the counter and coming at me.
Before we get to the part where he comes at you, do you remember if you guys are having any sort of argument, if anything's being said, if he's saying something, you're saying something, whatever the case may be?
I don't recall any of that.
So you remember now all of a sudden there's a moment he's coming at you. I want you to describe that as best as you can. Maybe he's just usually walking in your direction.
No, he was coming at me very quickly and aggressively to the point where I kind of backed off and braced myself, and I actually verbally said, what are you doing? Oh my God, what are you doing?
When you said the words, what are you doing? What did you do?
He proceeded to knock me into the front door that was behind me, and at that point then we both fell to the floor. So then we're on the floor, and he's just trying to keep me on the floor, and he keeps punching me wherever he can find access to punch me, so whether it be the face, the chest, the back, wherever. And he was a wrestler, and the best way I can describe what he was doing was trying to keep me in wrestling moves and keep me on the floor so that I couldn't escape.
You say he's a wrestler.
A high school coach, or a coach, maybe it wasn't high school, but he was a wrestling coach. And I can't remember if he wrestled himself, but as the struggle continues and I'm trying to break free, there was a point when I yelled at him. I said, I love you, why are you doing this? And he said, no you don't, fuck you, I'm gonna kill you. He just continues to, for lack of a better phrase, beat the shit out of me. And I keep trying to escape. There is a point where I'm able to stand up, and he continues to punch me in the face. At one point he gets me onto the floor, and
Are you still in the same place by the door, or has the fight moved?
nope, it moved through the living room, and then where I landed on the floor was, I landed face first, with my upper body like on the kitchen tile, and then my lower half was on the carpet of the living room. And at that point there was blood everywhere.
Where is the blood coming from?
I believe my nose. At that time he had broken my nose. But I remember trying to push myself up, and he was on me, and every time I tried to push myself up I couldn't grip on the floor because there was so much blood, and he would purposely put his weight on me and push me back down, so I was unable to get up.
Through all of this, are you fighting, resisting, trying to stop him?
Yes.
So what comes next?
So I remember laying there, and I was laying on my left side, and I remember seeing the trash can there. There was a black trash can, and at this point he was taking both of his hands and he was taking my head and he was slamming it into the floor. And so every time he would do that, my vision would go black, and I thought he was going to knock me out, or I would be unconscious or something. I was thinking, like, holy shit, is this really happening? And I was really disoriented and dizzy, and I was hearing all the shuffling in the kitchen. And then the next thing you know, Mr. Terry comes around behind me and stabs me in the neck.
stabbed you in the neck?
I didn't see it, but it was a knife. So at that point, again, it was just kind of the thought, like, holy shit, he just stabbed me with a knife. Like, I need to get the hell out of his house right now. So I remember standing up, and as I stood up, he continued to, try and stop me and try and punch me. I was able to get loose for enough time to be able to turn around, and directly behind me there was the garage door. So I was able to get the garage door open and run to the garage. So I pushed the opener with my left hand as I was running out to try and get the garage door to open so I could escape that way. I did, and I ran towards it, but it was very slow, so I couldn't quite get under it right away before he was able to get to me.
Right, so now you're waiting for the garage door to be open enough, and he attacks you again.
Yes.
Describe how he's attacking you again.
He was just trying to stop me from leaving, and we both fell to the ground at that point, and somehow had rolled out of the garage that was open down the driveway.
So now you've spilled out onto the driveway like out below.
Correct.
What's happening there?
So we were rolling down the driveway a bit, and I ended up in a position where I was under him. He was on top of me. He had used both of his hands to take my head and slam it into the cement multiple times. So he had the knife, and he had stabbed me 3 times in the right shoulder.
Alright, so he's still armed with this knife, even though you fled out of the home and he's chased you.
Yes, and this entire time I'm screaming for someone to come help me.
At what point do you realize that some sort of neighbor or person nearby has responded to the calls for help?
Yeah, as I was screaming, I could very faintly hear voices across the street saying, get off of her, and just hear them talking. A lot of it I couldn't make out what they said.
Alright, so we're at a point where Mr. Terry and you are in the driveway, you're still fighting, he's still armed with a knife. Tell me what else he's doing and what you're doing in response.
So again, I'm screaming this entire time, that he's going to kill me and somebody please help me. But he had stabbed me those 3 times in the shoulder, and he went to bring the knife down again, and I had reached up and I grabbed with my right hand the blade under the knife in midair, and don't ask me how I did it. I just grabbed, and I took the knife and I pulled it. Again, I'm on my back, and I pulled it across my face, and I just remember thinking he was gonna stab my eye out or something as I'm doing this, but I was able to pull the knife enough over that it fell out of his hand, and it fell to my left side. And then I kind of rolled over it and tucked it underneath me so that he didn't have access to it anymore.
So once you kind of tucked the knife under your body, rolled onto it, does he stop fighting you, or does he still
No.
trying to get the knife?
No, he was still slamming my head to the floor, and he would reach down with his hand, and he would try and fish for the knife real quick, but then I would try to get up, and then he would hold me back down again, and then kind of just back and forth, trying to fish for the knife, and I'd get up, and he'd try to fish for the knife, and then he'd push me back down, and there was a point when he had gotten really pissed off because I was kind of holding the knife with my arm as it's tucked under me, and he reached down and he bit me on the forearm here to try and get the knife loose from my grasp.
Is that the only place he bit you?
No. Shortly after that, after he fished a couple more times for the knife and couldn't get it, he reached down and he bit me twice on the side of my left cheek to try and get me to let go.
Throughout all of this, you were screaming, yelling for help, asking him to stop, putting up resistance.
Yes.
So, does the fight sort of end?
Yeah, so we didn't live that far from the hospital and stuff, and as the neighbors were, I later found out they were on the phone with 911 at the time. We could hear sirens coming, you could hear them coming from around the corner, not too far away, and when we both heard the sirens, that's when we got up off and we ran back in the house. I got up and I grabbed the knife so he couldn't get it back again, and I couldn't see very clearly because my contacts were in, but they were all covered in blood. But I ran across the street to the voices of the neighbors who were telling me to come over there, come here. And then I proceeded to go across the street and collapse on my back in the front yard.
Like Kay, police found Michelle lying in her neighbor's yard after being bitten, beaten, and stabbed multiple times. Michelle was lucky to survive the attack. However, she had to spend 5 days in intensive care. A detective, Matthew Crumbach, who investigated the crime scene, said it was as close to a homicide as you could get without it being a homicide. For his violent acts towards Michelle, Matthew was charged with attempted murder. After being arrested for attacking Michelle, Matthew contacted an old friend to testify for him in court. That old friend was a woman he had dated nearly 20 years earlier. Her name was Kay Baker. Kay was more than happy to testify and stand up for her friend's character in court. She told the judge, "Matthew is very truthful and I trust him completely." Michelle tried desperately to get Kay to see the monster that Matthew truly was. During the trial, Michelle sent Kay photos of her stab wounds through Facebook Messenger and said, "Please don't let this be you." But Kay could only see the man she knew Matthew to be back in those days 20 years prior when they dated. Kay was not the only one defending Matthew. He had many friends and family in the courtroom supporting him. They all just glared and shook their heads as Michelle spoke in court. Somehow, Matthew's lawyer convinced the jury that his attack on Michelle was in self-defense. He further explained, being an ex-Marine, Matthew used his training to neutralize the fight that Michelle had started. Matthew was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison for assault with intent to cause great bodily harm. In a letter written to the Michigan Parole Board, Michelle said, "If he gets out, I fear for myself and my family, and for the next victim. Society is in danger." Michelle's warnings fell on deaf ears, and Matthew served only 3 years before being discharged in December of 2021. Matthew was released on good behavior and had passed a domestic violence class. Matthew stayed in touch with Kay during those 3 years he spent in prison. After he was released, he moved to Florida to begin a new life with her. All seemed to be going well until the dreadful morning of May the 28th shined a light on what was going on behind closed doors. Matthew claimed he was not guilty of hurting or killing his girlfriend Kay. However, prosecutors believe Matthew murdered her in a jealous rage because he believed that she had danced with another man while they were at the bar. After Kay's murder, investigator Crumbach, who was part of the team who investigated the crime scene after Matthew's attack on Michelle, told the Times that Matthew Terry was a textbook case of an evil, narcissistic, manipulative killer. The trial between Matthew Terry and the state of Florida began in November of 2022. Prosecutors worked hard to convince the jury that Matthew was responsible for the death of Kay Baker and wanted Matthew to receive the death penalty. They believed Matthew had also tried to take his own life after murdering Kay. That's why he was found with multiple cuts on his throat. Matthew's lawyers tried to convince the jury that Matthew and Kay had been attacked by an intruder who Matthew was unable to identify, and this perpetrator escaped out a window. Matthew's attorneys claimed that deputies gave up the chase too quickly. They assumed that Matthew was the killer immediately and therefore allowed the real killer to get away. Since the murder weapon was never recovered, Matthew's lawyers tried to downplay the size of the missing knife from the kitchen, the bird's beak knife, to state the knife's inability to do the damage that was done to Kay.
Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was the knives. You said you actually looked and you're the one who found that there was that one bird's beak knife missing, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that one bird's beak knife was the only one missing.
Out of the butcher block? Yes, ma'am.
And that is what we call a paring knife. It's a little curved knife, right?
Yes, ma'am.
There were a bunch of steak knives there, right?
Outside of the kitchen, or the block in the door?
Either in the block itself or outside of the block. There were a bunch of steak knives, right?
Yes.
Bunch of big knives too, right?
Yes.
And the one that we're talking about is a little itty bitty small paring knife, and that's the only one that was missing from the home, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have any idea if that ever even existed in the year prior?
I cannot tell you that.
Thank you.
Matthew's attorneys fought hard to keep the previous case between Matthew and Michelle out of the current case, knowing how damaging it would be for the jury to know about Matthew's violent history. They didn't, however, get their way. Michelle was brought in to testify, and she shared the assault that she had suffered at the hands of Matthew back in 2017, which possibly played a major role in the jury's decision. Within only an hour and 10 minutes, the jury unanimously convicted Terry on a charge of first-degree murder and sentenced him not to death, but to life in prison.
But based on what I heard, I believe that you should have been in prison in Michigan and that Miss Baker should still be alive. This is Florida. You're going to prison for the rest of your life. I adjudicate you guilty. I sentence you to life in prison. I impose all fines, fees, associated charges, and I advise you that you have 30 days to appeal the judgment and sentence entered against you. Thank you.
It's just a man parking his SUV in the lot of a small-town motel. Nothing out of the ordinary. The middle-aged man seems to be concerned with the appearance of his vehicle, taking extra care to polish it a bit here and there. He certainly doesn't seem to have a care in the world as he walks away. That's actually quite amazing, since the man, Daniel Prince of Bostic, North Carolina, had just brutally murdered an 80-year-old woman less than an hour before. No one who would have seen him walking down the street to another nearby parking lot would have any idea that a serial killer was casually moving among them, satisfied with his kill and enjoying a warm, sunny day in South Carolina. No one would have suspected that he was on his way to put that woman's body in a shallow grave in the mountains of North Carolina. This was at least his fourth kill. Thanks to some carelessness on his part, it would be his last. Come with us as we look into the diabolical case of serial killer Daniel Prince.
If you tell him to turn that off, I can talk to you a little more freely.
Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the loved ones of Edna Suttles and the other victims discovered in this devastating case. The date was August 27th, 2021, in the small town of Travelers Rest near the border between North and South Carolina, a scenic rural area in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. This Greenville County, South Carolina location is a quiet, out-of-the-way place, and it made a perfect hunting ground for 59-year-old Daniel Prince. Prince, working as a handyman, had been employed by Edna Suttles to do some work on her home. A repair or two here or there, and a relationship between them developed, a friendship that brought Prince into her realm of trust. An 80-year-old retired businesswoman and the owner of A1 Freedom Bail Bonding, Edna was a fixture in the community, vibrant and active. She took care to check up on and assist a number of elderly people in her community as well. On this very morning, she was scheduled to sit with a homebound friend, a friend whose family was counting on her that day. Edna left her home that morning but never showed up at her intended destination.
Greenville County 911, what's the location of your emergency?
The thing is, a sitter was supposed to show up to be with my mom today, and she's in her 80s, and she didn't show up. We've come to her house, and we can't get nobody to the door or anything. Her name is Edna Suttles. We not like her. She goes up like clockwork. So something's wrong.
In almost all jurisdictions, there's an unspoken rule that a competent adult is generally not considered missing until they've been out of contact for at least 24 hours. Very recently, however, the Greenville County Sheriff's Office had decided to change that policy.
Initially, from a sheriff's office standpoint, when missing persons were reported by phone, we would take a report by phone. The Suttles case, we changed some things here. And the Suttles case was kind of in time with that, if you will, where we were going to respond to every missing person. Usually it was, there had to be some extenuating circumstances, some type of medical issue.
Members of the sheriff's office were dispatched to make a wellness check on Suttles, but could get no answer at the door of her home. After obtaining a warrant, they entered the property. Inside, they did not find her, any evidence of foul play, or any clues as to her whereabouts. Her vehicle was not at the residence. That vehicle, a champagne-colored Jeep Grand Cherokee, would prove to be the starting point of suspicions that something terrible may have befallen the woman.
Miss Suttles was pretty well known in the northern part of this county. She was a bail bonding agent. She was a tough lady, street smart, had a great reputation here in our area. She was certainly nobody's fool.
Edna was gone. The police put out alerts through all the local media. They described her vehicle, gave its license plate number, and warned that she could be in need of immediate medical attention. They could not have known that Edna had already been killed and taken across a nearby state line. It was 7 days before the Jeep was found by an officer of a local police department on September 3rd in the parking lot of the Best Western Hotel in the town of Travelers Rest. The Jeep had been backed into a parking space, concealing the license plate from anyone just driving through the lot. After determining that Edna had not checked into the hotel, members of the Greenville County Sheriff's Office scanned the hotel's security footage for the day of the disappearance. They found what they were looking for: footage of the Jeep being driven into the parking lot, and the person who got out was definitely not Edna Suttles. A man got out of the car and then began to wipe it down, paying particular attention to the inside of the front seat passenger's door and then the door frame and quarter panels. He left and then came back quickly to give it one more wipe down, and then he walked away, leaving the property. Any number of missing persons cases turn out to have nothing sinister about them. Some are just a person taking a short trip without telling anyone. Sometimes it can come from a mental health crisis. Sometimes just a romantic rendezvous that ran a little long. At this moment, though, investigators realized that any pretense of Suttles willfully being out of touch with those that she knew was probably gone. This missing persons case had taken a serious and unsettling turn. Investigators now had to determine who the mysterious man was and what happened prior to the 1:46 p.m. timestamp on the security video. There were hours still unaccounted for from that morning when Suttles presumably left her home to visit and sit with a friend. In this day and age, security cameras are nearly everywhere, and investigators began searching for the pieces of the puzzle that was unfolding before them. Now, with a date and time to work backwards from, it was a matter of finding the footage and canvassing locations in the small town until they could pick up a trail. Working diligently, law enforcement was able to piece together video from around the area that gave a timeline for the day's events. At 9:22 a.m. on the morning of August 27, 2021, a security camera video shows a Chevrolet Cruze pull into the parking lot at a Food Lion supermarket in Travelers Rest, South Carolina. Just 8 minutes later, at 9:30 a.m., Edna Suttles drives away from her home in her champagne-colored Jeep Grand Cherokee. Security camera footage from a nearby antique store showed the time of departure and initial direction of travel. At 9:38 a.m., a man matching the appearance of the individual spotted leaving her Jeep at the Best Western purchases a pack of strawberry yogurt cups at Food Lion. The man uses the store rewards card, and investigators now had his name, identifying him as Daniel Prince. A minute later, Edna Suttles pulls into the grocery store parking lot and parks her vehicle near Prince's. Footage shows Prince holding a grocery bag and gesturing to Suttles. He then goes to his own car and retrieves a small bag. He gets into the front passenger seat of Suttles' Jeep. Minutes later, the Jeep leaves the parking lot with the pair inside. 4 hours pass before there was any more video evidence. Then, at 1:43 p.m., Suttles' Jeep is seen driving away from her residence back in the direction of the Food Lion supermarket. Minutes later, at 2:02 p.m., the Jeep pulls into a different part of the parking lot than before. Prince is shown exiting the Jeep from the driver's side door and walking across the parking lot to the Chevy Cruze he had arrived in. Prince then moves his Cruze alongside of the Jeep in the parking lot, front passenger door to front passenger door. He gets out and moves something from one vehicle to the other. A closer analysis shows that it is a person with the starkly blonde hair of Suttles. Prince then drives Suttles' Jeep away, and the blonde-haired person is left unmoving inside of Prince's car. 5 minutes later, Prince parks the car at the Best Western parking lot, wipes it down, and walks back in the direction of the Food Lion parking lot. At 2:14 p.m., Prince gets back into his Chevy Cruze with the unmoving Suttles and drives away. The trail of video evidence goes cold from there, but Prince's purchase led right to his door. The rewards card information provided an address in Bostic, North Carolina, about 70 miles away in the rural area of Rutherford County, North Carolina. So, who was this man, Daniel Glenn Prince? What connection could he have with Edna, and how did he come to meet with her on that fateful day? A native of Michigan, Prince had moved to the North Carolina mountains a few years before, making his home in one of the many hollers in Rutherford County. It's a friendly place, but one where a person who might want privacy is apt to find plenty of it. Prince and his wife, KK, settled in, and he began working as a handyman, often for elderly single or widowed ladies. He had a knack for the work and also for developing relationship with those women, gaining their trust and befriending them. Prince, however, harbored a troubled past, one that he didn't bring up. As a youth, he had joined the military to get away from a life that was leading him down the wrong path. The stint in the military was short-lived, as was his avoidance of a life of crime. His criminal record showed charges of assault and battery as well as firearms violations. Most disturbing was his conviction in Michigan in 1997 for kidnapping a woman. He was sentenced to 13 to 30 years in prison for the crime and served 12 years of that sentence before being paroled. His parole was terminated 2 years later, and he moved out of the state not long after that before ending up in North Carolina. Detectives now had not just videos and a timeline, but they had the name of a man with a history of kidnapping. Quickly, the Greenville County Sheriff's Department contacted their counterparts in the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department just across the state line. Probable cause for auto theft had been established at the very least, and a warrant to arrest Prince and search his property was quickly granted. The Rutherford County Sheriff was more than willing to assist in serving that warrant. Prince surrendered with remarkable calm to the large number of heavily armed officers who had arrived at his property.
Totally cooperating. Just put my. You want me to do this? Put my guy stand up in the feet. Right there. Yeah. Sir, I would be very cooperative. Let's try that close. So.
Prince was quickly taken into custody and on to the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department, where he was initially interviewed. It was obvious from the beginning that Prince wanted to run the interview and control the narrative. He was arrogant and seemed unfazed by what was happening, so investigators let him talk.
I talked to you about August 27th, 2029 this year.
What day was it, you said?
It was a Friday.
Okay.
Where are you on that day? What's your typical Fridays like?
Some Fridays I go do jobs, some Fridays I stay home, some Fridays I go look at jobs, I do all sorts of things. Days run together for me because I don't have a set schedule.
Fair enough. Whereas the jobs come, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so specifically the 27th.
Mm-hmm.
What, 2 weeks ago? Do you remember where you were at?
Not specifically.
Where do you think you were at?
I've been going all over the place. I've been back and forth to Charlotte. I've been down to South Carolina.
Like, where's your jobs in South Carolina taking you?
Actually, I was down at Travelers Rest, but I don't know if it was Friday or Thursday. I know I'd been there earlier that week.
Okay. But you don't remember which day specifically?
No, it was either Thursday or Friday.
What kind of job were you working on?
I wasn't.
You wasn't?
I wasn't. This lady had talked to me several times. I've been down to her house 2 or 3 times. We kind of got to be friends. This woman has so many damn problems, mostly her daughter.
Yeah.
And what she did is she had me looking at ductwork that she wanted done because somebody had done ductwork for her and she was suing them because they didn't do all the ductwork or something. She would call me and have me come down there, and she was constantly having problems. She said she needed to have money at one point in time to help her daughter because her daughter was in jail. Then she needed money another time because she was hiring a private investigator because her son-in-law she talked to me all kinds of stuff about it. The guy did pretty good stuff like that. But she kept seeming like she was blowing me off and actually doing any work for her. She was going to have a guy come up and wash her house, and I said, well, if I'm coming down here to look at other stuff, I got a power washer, I can wash your house and clean all your eaves for a couple $100. She was going to have me do it. Pack my power washer. Went down there. Never did the work. Because I don't have the money right now. I gotta sell a bunch of jewelry. I gotta sell a bunch of stuff to go ahead and get more money for a private investigator. Then she wanted a different private investigator because she didn't like the one she had. So it's like one excuse after the other.
How'd you meet her initially?
Years ago.
Okay.
Years ago, it was somebody giving me her name or number, or my name and number. I get passed around a lot.
Okay.
So it was a years ago thing.
That's pretty awesome. Your name made all the way down to Travelers Rest, South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
That's good reputation.
Yeah.
Solid work. All right, so
why are we?
What you're telling us is that's not you on the 27th. Food Line parking lot, Travelers Rest.
I don't think so.
That's not you.
That's me. Where's that?
Food Line, August 27th, 2021, 9:23.
Okay.
22 seconds. Ringing a bell?
Yep. Yeah, I went down to Food Line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what were you doing down there that day?
She wanted me to look at some stuff at her house.
Okay.
And she picked me up at Food Line because she wanted me with her when she was gonna go meet some guy for private investigator.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us about that.
She wanted me to meet her down there.
Okay.
She was nervous because she says, I'm not sure I trust this guy. And she knows I've been in the military. And she says, will you meet me? And I go, yeah. And I said, where do you want to meet? She says, well, he's been talking to me. I guess I'm supposed to meet him at a restaurant. And I'm supposed to meet him down near Food Lion. So I went down to Food Lion, and she met me. And he didn't show up where we went to next. And she had been trying to get a hold of him. And we went to her house for about 2 hours. And then we went back to Food Lion. And
She just dropped you off and you went home and you just noticed something about PI?
Well, she wanted me to see if this guy was going to meet her where he was supposed to meet her.
You know where?
There was a hotel lobby that he had finally said, meet me at the hotel. She said, drive up there and see if he's there. And I drove up there, and things are starting to sound really squirrely to me. And then she finally said, just drop me off at home. And if you drop me off at home, my daughter will pick me up. And I said, because I got to get going. I can't be doing this all day.
So that's you all coming down 25, you and her together. Back towards the hotel.
It could be.
Because that's her car. That's about 13:45 on the 27th.
Okay.
So you're with her there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess.
Yeah.
I'm not saying yeah. I'm just saying that could be.
Hey, it's a different angle. But I mean, we've watched this car. Right?
Okay.
Here's y'all in the hotel parking lot.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh look. There's y'all backing in.
Yeah.
A couple of different copies of it. Backing in.
Yeah.
Oh look. You get out. Nobody else gets out.
I told you that.
You're walking around the car. You wipe the entire car down.
Because I was worried.
You were worried. There's you walking across the parking lot in front of Little Caesars. And there's you getting back into your car and driving away.
Oh, she's with me.
Look, man. Where's it?
I don't have a
We need to know. And listen, Dan. Okay, you are a good dude. I honestly do believe that you screwed up years and years ago.
Okay.
And now.
Can I look at these?
What?
I just want to look and see what you're talking about.
Let's you need to hear this, man. Okay? You're not a bad guy.
Right.
Nobody is saying that you're some evil, twisted dude. Okay? Where's right now? Her family is desperately looking for her.
She's missing right now.
Yes, Dan, where is it?
I don't have a clue. I dropped her off at her house.
Dan, please listen. You did not drop her off at her house. We have followed that car the entire day, up and down 25. There's a number of minutes that were unaccounted for that are not by her house. Okay?
Which car? Mine or hers?
Dan, stop playing games. You know
When I got, okay, I can help you here. Yeah, give me a second. You gotta let me answer the questions when they're asked. When I dropped her vehicle off, looking for the guy, she said she wanted me to take her and drive around in my vehicle. So I left her vehicle. I went down to Food Lion, and she was in my vehicle with me. And I dropped her off at home.
Watch the video. She is not. The car sits there. It sits there, man.
No, not in her car. My car. I dropped her off in my car.
You did not drop anyone off, man.
I picked her back up. She sat in my car at Food Lion, and I went back and got her.
What are you trying to say? Please explain. Explain yourself. Please explain at which point that we must have missed in the video that you dropped her off. Why that your vehicle never went back to her house. We have your vehicle, that silver car, going straight up 25 and not stopping at her house.
That's not true.
It is true.
I stopped at her house.
What's your wife gonna think about this?
Well, my wife would be very upset if I had done something, but I didn't, and I don't know where Edna is.
You do.
I don't know where Edna is.
Let's get back to why you wiped the car down. What you said you were worried about what?
The only thing I did was because I knew I'd been in and out of her car all the time and with her. I'm like, there is no way in hell I'm going to just leave this thing here. Because she's got somebody to look after her.
It's not making sense. You're the last person to be a vehicle you wipe out of a lady that's missing.
That sounds really fucked up.
It does. That's why we're here. But it is as fucked up as it sounds. We're having to do it right. We're going to do it right. But we got guys under now that are home deal about where we think she might be.
His story rambled, and it didn't really add up, but the holes weren't big enough to catch him just yet. As the interrogation went on, deputies were still at work searching his property. The officers there found a formidable arsenal, including 2 AR-15 variants and up to 20 handguns, plus a large stockpile of ammunition. The serial numbers on both the AR-15s had been removed. Chapter 44 of Title 18 of the United States Federal Code bans convicted felons from owning firearms, and here he was with many of them in his possession. The removal of serial numbers is also illegal, building even more trouble for the man. The firearms violations immediately upgraded this investigation to the federal level, meaning that Prince could be held longer as the investigation continued. As the search of Prince's house continued, more damning evidence turned up, but not evidence dealing directly with the disappearance of Edna Suttles. This evidence would end up bringing down a serial killer who had lived unnoticed by the surrounding community for years and whose crimes were unknown even to the wife he shared his home with. Deputies discovered among his possessions the driver's license and passport of Nancy Rigo, age 66, a woman from nearby Charlotte, North Carolina. Rigo, a widow, had been missing since 2017 and had only made sporadic email and text contacts with her family members since that time. Rigo, or the person who may have been posing as her online, always refused to meet directly with family members when asked. The same family members would verify that Rigo and Prince were supposed to be in a relationship during this time. Her wallet was also found among his possessions, along with financial records that indicated Prince's address was now hers. Prince was also found to have Rigo's bank card in his wallet. It's not hard to see the possibility that Rigo was dead and that Prince had been using her money rose to the suspicions of law enforcement. A separate search warrant had been issued now to look for additional information on Rigo while the search for Suttles continued. The search allowed for the seizure of the aforementioned items, plus a purse that had belonged to Rigo's mother, Dolores Sellers Gore, who had passed away in 2017 from what had been called natural causes at the time. Prescription bottles with Rigo's name on them were also found, ones for cyclobenzaprine, tramadol, and lorazepam, all filled in 2017. A black bag was found with more sinister contents. That bag contained zip ties, a taser device, lubricant, and crushed pills in a bag labeled Ativan, the brand name for lorazepam, a strong sedative that can be used to slow breathing and even cause death when combined with alcohol or some other substances. In custody, Prince was playing for time and maintaining his innocence when it came to Suttles' disappearance. On October 9th, as Prince sat in jail, his time ran out. Prince's wife decided it was time to leave and began efforts to put the home and surrounding property on the market. She enlisted a couple of friends to help with cleaning up the property and wrangling together a few chickens and other domesticated birds that were living on the property. One of those friends, while walking along the outer edges of the property, spied a large white bee box deep in the woods at the very corner of the land. KK Prince had been unaware of its existence and the contents that her friend found within. She quickly called law enforcement to search the box. After obtaining another search warrant, deputies from the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department found Suttles' purse, Jeep keys, rope, zip ties, and a variety of other small items belonging to her. A single opened cup of yogurt of the same type and flavor that Prince had purchased on that fateful day was also inside the box. Nearby was a vehicle's back floorboard panel, a black plastic bag, and a tarp. The floor panel would match one missing in Prince's other vehicle, a vehicle that had been taken in for repairs right after Suttles' disappearance. The repair shop verified that among the repairs was a request to replace that cargo compartment panel matching the one that was found in the woods. The trash bag also found at the scene included some personal items, possibly belonging to Suttles, such as jewelry, a bracelet, and a pair of shoes. The items were sent off for testing to the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division's Forensic Services Laboratory, and the yogurt container came back showing signs that drugs had been mixed with the yogurt. Those traces of drugs included cyclobenzaprine, tramadol, and lorazepam, matching the same pill bottles of Nancy Rigo that were found in Prince's home. Realizing that a piece of linchpin evidence had been found, law enforcement brought in a cadaver dog to search the property on October the 10th. While the dog could not find Suttles' body at the site, it did alert officers that it detected the scent of human remains at the same location where the panel, trash bag, and tarp had been found. The body had not been located, but officers moved with a certainty that they had evidence of Suttles' murder. Sitting in jail, Prince so far held fast to his story through 2 interviews. He had admitted to knowing Suttles and having to come to Travelers Rest to visit her a number of times before. He first maintained that on the day of her disappearance, he had met up with her, driven back with her to her home to discuss some matters about a private investigator that had been hired to look into her daughter's upcoming divorce. He then returned to the Best Western parking lot alone in her Jeep to retrieve his own vehicle and go home. He explained that he wiped down the vehicle to keep himself out of the private investigator's efforts. He stood pat on this explanation, thinking no connections had been found that would upend his story. Now, however, armed with new evidence, law enforcement agents began a third custodial interview with the man. It became quickly evident that Prince knew he was caught, and he moved quickly to control the narrative and as much of the outcome as he could.
There are things that have to happen. And there are things that are going to happen. And I'm a realist, and I have acceptance of this. I would like a little bit of control in how they happen. If you tell them to turn that off, I will talk to you a little more freely.
For almost an hour, Prince confessed to law enforcement, stating that he needed to fully disclose his sins. He said that he knew he was looking at life imprisonment at best, and he quickly made a deal to ensure that he would not see the death penalty handed down to him. As part of the deal, he wanted to inform them of things that were not on law enforcement's radar, and that he would come clean when his attorney was present. Most importantly, he told the officers where they could find Suttle's body. In May of 2022, Prince led law enforcement officers to a piece of ground on a nearby property where they found her body buried but still identifiable. Still, in the custodial interview, he went on to explain that he had been involved in the deaths of Dolores Sellers, Nancy Rigo, and Lee Goodman. He had confessed to multiple murders. A serial killer had been uncovered. In the matter of the deaths of Dolores Sellers and Nancy Rigo, he claimed that he had hypothetically assisted euthanizing the elderly Sellers, hinting that Rigo had been a part of the process. He intimated that Rigo later was bothered greatly by what had happened and had threatened to tell the police. Rigo then became his next victim. He disposed of her body, did not tell anyone, and used a power of attorney that she had given him to have her Social Security checks routed to his residence. Sellers' death, originally attributed to natural causes, was reinvestigated and then declared a homicide. The third victim, Lee Goodman, was originally from Florida and had disappeared in the time between the deaths of Rigo and Suttles. Prince claimed that Goodman had attempted to rob him, but that it did not work out well, and her body was disposed of in a rural area after he had cleaned up the incident. No evidence of a robbery was ever found. Prince avoided trial and was sentenced to life imprisonment.
We certainly want to thank y'all for joining us today as we announce that arrest and subsequent plea deal has been reached in connection with the disappearance and death of Edna Suttles. She went missing from Greenwood County on August 27th of 2021. This investigation uncovered the man responsible, a man who has now been identified as a serial killer residing in Boston, North Carolina, 59-year-old Daniel Glenn Prince.
He is serving his term with no chance at parole at the United States Penitentiary, Hazleton, located in Bruce Mills, West Virginia, a maximum security prison. It is known by its inmates as Misery Mountain, an apt destination for such a man. While Daniel Prince will continue to live out his remaining days, his actions devastated families and communities. Our hearts go out to the victims of the crime, knowing that each of them left behind loving families and friends who, up until now, had no answers as to what had happened to their loved ones. Still, there is a question. Did Daniel Prince confess to all of his sins, or just a handful of them? Could there be other victims left behind in places he lived before he got to Bostic, North Carolina, and was eventually caught? Until he decides to say otherwise, we have to live with the hope that his trail of terror began and ended with these 4 unfortunate women. This is a case you won't soon forget. Deep in the Appalachian foothills of Pike County, Ohio, 8 members of the Roden family were slain, execution style, in their beds on the night of April 21st into the morning of the 22nd, 2016. 3 children, all aged 3 and under, were spared, and a tight-knit Appalachian community was left with questions of who had done such an act and why. The largest mass murder in Ohio history would also set off one of its largest criminal investigations.
I just might tell you this is just the most bizarre story I've ever seen in being involved in law enforcement.
Before we begin, we would like to send our sympathies to the loved ones who fell victim to these abominable acts on this dark night. The western edge of the Appalachian Mountains is home to Pike County, Ohio. Some 28,000 souls call the area home in a handful of small towns and among the valleys and hollows of the area. It can be a hard-scrabble place to live, with fully 24% of its population living at or below the poverty line. Opportunity is a rare resource, but it is balanced by a fierce independence. A frantic phone call to 911 on the morning of April the 22nd would lead authorities to the evil that had been done, as the sister of one of the victims arrived at the property to feed the animals on the farm. She, Bobby Jo Manley, and her brother James then went into the house, discovering the horrors that had been done. Law enforcement officers and first responders flocked quickly to the scene and went into the cluster of 3 homes. The grisly discoveries they made showed that the attackers had achieved complete and total surprise on their victims. In the living room of the first house, they found the patriarch of the Roden clan, 40-year-old Christopher Roden Sr. Christopher had been shot 9 times from very close range and was the only one of the entire family to show even the slightest signs of defensive wounds. 5 of the shots were to the face and head, another 3 in his torso, and a single gunshot was in his arm, as if he had attempted to ward off the attack. Nearby lay the body of Gary Roden, age 38, Christopher's cousin. The man had 2 gunshot wounds to the head from close range and a third close enough to leave a muzzle stamp on his temple. There was no sign of struggle from Gary, and it is thought he was asleep at the time the first shot was fired. In the next house, Chris's eldest son, Clarence Frankie Roden, and his fiancée, Hannah Hazel Gilley, were found murdered in their bed. Their 4-month-old child was found unharmed, laying between them, while their 3-year-old child was found asleep on the floor. Frankie had been shot 3 times in the head and face. Hannah Gilley had been shot through the eye and an additional 4 times. James Manley then rushed down to the 3rd home, that of his sister and Chris Roden Sr.'s ex-wife, Dana Roden, a home they shared with their 16-year-old son, Chris Jr., and daughter Hannah. Hannah, 19, had just given birth 4 days before to her 2nd child. Dana had been shot 5 times in the head, including point-blank shots through the temple and 1 upwards under the chin. In a nearby room, Chris Jr. was found with 2 fatal gunshots down through the top of his head. In the last room, Hannah Roden was found, dead from 2 gunshot wounds to the head. The newborn baby was unharmed and still attempting to suckle at the mother's breast. Her 2-year-old daughter Sophia was staying with its father and the family while Hannah recovered from the birth, and so she had been spared this night of horrors. As police and first responders swarmed over the scene, the area was cordoned off and the members of the local community began to gather to offer support and to share in the shock of the discoveries. As news spread about the killings, a man from the crowd, Donald Stone, a cousin of Chris Roden Sr., began to worry about another member of the Roden clan who lived a few miles further down the road. He quickly called Kenneth Roden, age 44, and no one answered. Stone and two friends quickly drove down to Kenneth's small home and found that that man had not been spared the grisly fate of the other members of the family. He lay dead in the house, a single gunshot wound through his eye, fired from close range.
When you walked up to the residence, did you notice, was the door unlocked?
Yes.
So you walked into the residence together and you said Luke was there first, but then you, and then what happened?
And then we walked in. We walked into supposedly the living room, and I noticed to the right, I didn't see him in there nowhere, so I seen a stairway to the right, and I walked up the stairway, and that's where I found him up there in his bed.
And when you say you found him,
I found Kenny.
Can you tell us what condition you found him in?
He had blood all over his eyes.
And where was he located?
In his bed.
Okay. Did you believe him to be dead or alive at that time?
He was dead.
There were now 8 dead, all members of the same extended family, and there was a disturbing lack of evidence as to who had committed the massacre. No shell casings were found. There were no reports of any gunshots. 2 pit bulls that lived at one of the trailers didn't even start barking that night, and that particular pair of dogs had a reputation for being hostile to anyone they did not know. In addition, not a single cell phone was found among the victims. There were no other signs of theft, and so the missing phones had to in some way be a removal of possible evidence by the perpetrators. The sheer number of deaths without any signs of the victims being alerted pointed to multiple assailants rather than a single suspect. But who could have done it? Forensic experts from the County Sheriff's Department and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation scoured the scene for any evidence they could find. Police sought out witnesses and tips, racing to outpace rumor and the code of the hills that might keep some people silent. Families in the community attempted to cope with the loss of so many lives as they buried their loved ones in the deep, dark hills of Appalachian, Ohio. The Roden patriarch, Chris Sr., and his brother, Kenneth, had a reputation for being on the wrong side of the law. A discovery of a pot-growing operation in the barn next to Kenneth's house and the discovery of what could have been a cockfighting ring set up at the family complex only strengthened the suspicions that those endeavors had brought an end to those men. Rumors swirled about the community that the Rodens had been involved with a Mexican drug cartel and that had led to their demise. Killings like these had been the hallmark of those organizations, but never in areas as far north as Ohio. 2 recent busts in pot-growing operations in Pike County had shown tenuous links to the Mexican drug cartels, so the smaller operation of the Rodens could conceivably have been part of the bigger picture. Others said that the Rodens had been part of the Cornbread Mafia, a large-scale drug operation that worked throughout the 5-state area of the Central Appalachian Mountains. That organization runs pill mills and meth labs, making use of communities back in those hidden hollers of the region, as well as short travel distances across state lines to facilitate the gathering of the necessary manufacturing materials. More of a loose confederation than a true cartel, the Cornbread Mafia, as it was known, had some history of violence, but nothing like the concerted mass killings seen here. Still, law enforcement could not rule out that organization had moved into a new phase of violence. Hundreds of tips poured into law enforcement and rewards were posted looking for evidence in the slayings. State and local investigators poured through the tips and tracked down potential connections, all to no avail. Enticing leads ended up going nowhere. The vehicles, mobile homes, and other evidence was removed from the Rodens' property and put into storage to preserve it as their work continued. Custody of the 3 children left alive at the scene and 2-year-old Sophia was brought to the courts to decide. Little Sophia, safely at the home of her father and another set of grandparents on the night of the murders, it turns out, would be the linchpin for the entire investigation and the centerpiece for the entire massacre. Investigators had no way of knowing at the time that what looked like an organized crime hit was actually a vendetta between two families that played out over the custody of that small child. Billy Wagner and Chris Roden Sr. had history together, there was no doubt about that. They didn't live that far apart, and both were from a more rough and tumble part of the community. The possibility that they had sometimes been partners in crime and possibly competitors in it was common knowledge of that part of local lore. Billy's son Jake and Chris's daughter Hannah Roden had dated from the time she was 13 until a year or so before the killing, and they shared the daughter Sophia. Outwardly, Billy Wagner shared nothing but praise and friendship about Chris, particularly in an interview with the Ohio BCI.
Me and him, you know, our plan was gonna buy a bar on the beach and just sit there, you know, get drunk, sit on the beach and, you know, play with the strippers.
Once again, outwardly, the entire Wagner family seemed to be very concerned with Sophia's well-being. They filed for custody of the child shortly after the murders, producing documents allegedly signed by Hannah Roden stating that the father would have sole custody of the child should anything happen to her. And as the community settled back into normal life over the next few months, the Wagners, as a group, pulled up stakes and left the community. They headed to Alaska, about as far away as you could get from the violence that had occurred in Ohio. They would return, as a group, along with a new wife for Jake, about a year later. Things had cooled down in Pike County, and while the investigation wore on, life there had returned to normal for the regular population. The Wagners reintegrated into the community, and all the men got jobs at a local trucking company, where they were, for all intents and purposes, model employees. And that, on retrospect, was a little outside of their normal pattern. The Wagners had never been known as what one would call a model family, or even a normal one. In a region where families are close-knit and clannish by nature, the Wagners stood out. Growing up, the two sons, George and Jake, were homeschooled and kept close to the house. The tight family structure even held up after the parents, Billy and Angela Wagner, divorced, with Angela moving into a small home just down the road. While they kept to themselves and voted together on every family decision, it created a strong and indelible bond between them. When George married, his wife was also brought into the fold and kept under very controlling influences of the main four. When Jake married a woman while the family was in Alaska, she too would find herself under the crushing, controlling nature of the family. Not long after the family returned to Pike County from their stay in Alaska, something happened, and the two women bolted. What they told police and family members is not public knowledge, but perhaps coincidentally, the investigation into the Roden family massacre turned towards the Wagners. The facade of friendship and custodial care fell apart quickly, and a sinister story began to unfold, one of an illicit underage love affair, jealousy, and conspiracy. A story that would lead to cold-blooded, calculated murders, all to obtain permanent custody of the young Sophia. Assistant Attorney General Angela Canepa, leading the prosecution in the case, laid out the beginnings of the love affair to the court, setting the stage for what was to come.
It kind of starts with a love story, if you want to call that. A very young teenage girl, Hannah Mae Roden, age 13 at the time, was at the Pike County Fairgrounds. She participated in 4-H, and she had bunnies, and somebody introduced her to Jacob, who was almost 18 at that time, and she kept asking him to look at her bunnies or pet her bunnies. Jake will tell you that he was annoyed initially, but then on a second chance meeting, they started dating, if you can date at age 13. That was in August of 2010. Reportedly, Ultimately, Jake gets permission from Chris Roden Sr. to date his daughter, his very young daughter. Chris Roden agrees, but he always sends one to shop. Either Frankie or little Chris go with Hannah Mae whenever she's hanging out with Jake Roden. And you will learn as well that Chris Roden Sr. also knew Bella and were in fact friends. And so because of that, he gave his permission for her to be dating Jake.
Assistant Attorney General Angela Canepa, leading the prosecution in the case, laid out the beginnings of the love affair to the court, setting the stage for what was to come. The two broke up after jealousy and anger took a turn for the worse within Jake. She called her father to come and get her after Jake allegedly choked her. She said that she couldn't take not just Jake, but how the whole family attempted to control her life. From there, the battle began over who should have full-time custody over the child. Hannah proclaimed on social media to her friends that she would never give the baby up to Jake and she'd rather die than give a child up to him and his family. What she did not know was that the messages were being monitored as Jake and his mother, Angela Wagner, had hacked into her Facebook account. A seemingly private statement to her friends may well have set the families on a direct path that would lead to her death and those of 7 of her loved ones. Jake had already made statements saying that he didn't like the people Hannah was seeing and who their child was being exposed to. It was during this time that Hannah began dating a man named Charlie Gilley, the brother of her sister-in-law, Hannah Gilley. The short-lived relationship would result in another pregnancy for young Hannah Roden. The birth of that child didn't just further push Jake over the edge, but it also provided the Wagner family with an opportunity to enact a plan they had been working on for some time. 4 months prior to the birth of the child, Jake and his family had gathered around a table in their home to entertain a plan devised by Billy Wagner to remove Hannah, not just from the picture alone, but to remove anyone else who might have a claim to Jake and Hannah's child, Sophia. The possibility that other scores between the two families were going to get settled as well cannot be ruled out. The Wagners voted on it, as they often did with many life decisions that would affect the group. There were killings to be done, and afterwards they would file legal motions for the custody of Jake's daughter. No one would be left to stand in their way, and there would be no challenges to follow. What happened next was months of planning, purchasing, and preparing to do the deeds. The Wagners knew they had to cover their tracks and be discreet in every phase of the plan if they were to get away with their skullduggery as they intended. They needed to be thorough in the killings. They needed to be quiet in the planning. They needed to leave no evidence behind, and they needed to make sure no one would be alerted to the killings as they were happening.
Investigators also found receipts and video evidence of the Wagners making purchases of shoes during the same month of the homicides that matched identically the shoe tread marks left in blood at one of the scenes.
The family began by purchasing 2 pairs of athletic shoes from a nearby Walmart, one for each of the sons. The shoes were not the size worn by the children. The shoes were not used and instead were intended to be worn on the night of the murder. The shoes were different sizes than the young men normally wore and of styles they would not normally have chosen. Handguns were obtained for each of the 2 sons. The firearms chosen were .22 caliber long rifle semi-automatic pistols, quieter and with less recoil than a larger caliber pistol, but still very deadly, particularly at the short ranges used in the murders. The men also purchased a manufactured suppressor for one and parts for making a second for the other gun. While not completely silencing the gunfire, these would limit the sound to just coughs that wouldn't carry well outside of the trailers the Roden family lived in. In addition, they purchased brass catchers, pouches which are slung on the pistols to catch ejected shells after each shot were purchased and mounted on the guns. The two sons practiced with those weapons and others extensively over the intervening months in a wooded area behind the Wagner family property, as shown by later investigations where bullets were recovered from standing trees. In addition, the remnants of a burned-out homemade suppressor were found in the area after Jake told them where to look. The family also purchased a cell phone jamming device to be used during the slayings, and both young men dyed their hair to further change their appearances. While this was going on, according to Angela Wagner's testimony and plea deal, documents were forged showing that Hannah had signed a statement saying that if she were to die or to become unable to care for the child, custody of Sophia would revert to Jake Wagner and his family. Those documents would be held until a few days after the killings in hopes that they would receive the child in a way that would make them look caring and concerned and wanting to participate in the child's life, but not in the mother's death. The Wagner's son also began to stake out the Roden family homes. They were both familiar with the property and the people who lived there and how they came and went. What they learned now was the activity patterns of the family. When did they come home? How late did they stay up? Were there visitors after dark? And when the family slept? The information would serve them well in the terrible task they were undertaking. The fateful evening came right after Hannah Roden had given birth to her second child. Sophia had been sent to the Wagners for a couple of nights while Hannah, at her own home, recovered from the birth of the new child. As the Wagner plan sprang into action, Hannah went to bed with her newborn and went to sleep. The Wagners drove up to the Roden family property that included 3 trailers and homes along with a number of outbuildings and other farm features. The father, Billy Wagner, went into the house of Chris Roden Sr., ostensibly to recruit him for a lucrative drug deal. George and Jake hid in the pickup truck as their father gained entrance to the home. With murderous efficiency, they moved from home to home, killing adults and youths, but leaving the infants and toddlers untouched, just as they had planned. And then they disappeared into the night and began their plans to dispose of any evidence and assume their roles of shocked, surprised, and concerned members of the community, ones who shared a bond of friendship and near family with the murdered Rodens. The truck was ditched outside of the area. Their clothes and shoes were disposed of. The weapons, which could certainly incriminate them if ever found, were made to disappear in an ingenious manner. A cousin of the Wagners was having a birthday in the very near future. The man was a fisherman and often took his boat out on nearby lakes and waterways to enjoy his activity. The Wagners took the guns, shell casings, and suppressor remnants and placed them in gallon buckets strung on long lengths of rope. They then poured wet cement into the buckets and let them dry, sealing the evidence of their deadly deeds. And they turned them into boat anchors as gifts to the cousin. Those anchors were later taken out to a local lake and their lines were cut, sending the evidence to the muddy bottom. They would have remained there, unknown and lost, had things not taken the turn that they did. The 4 publicly maintained the image throughout their move to Alaska and again back to Ohio, but cracks began to appear in the facade. Perhaps the 2 women who left the family gave information. Perhaps someone at work overheard a conversation. But whatever it was, local and state law enforcement began putting together the pieces. Soon, listening devices were hidden in the work trucks used by the Wagners, and a wiretap was begun as well. The Wagners were questioned as to their relationships with the Rodens, then brought in, and finally charged with the murders and the other crimes dealing with that night.
We promised that the day would come when the rest would be made in the Pike County massacres. Today is that day. George Billy Wagner III, his wife Angela Wagner, and their sons, George Wagner IV and Edward Jake Wagner. After an extensive, thorough joint investigation by the Attorney General's office Bureau of Criminal Investigation, as well as our Special Prosecution Section, and Pike County Sheriff Charles Reeder's office. These 4 individuals are now in custody for allegedly committing this heartless, ruthless, cold-blooded murder.
I'd only been sheriff of Pike County less than a year before April 22nd, 2016. And that day changed a lot of our lives, including mine. The images of the houses, the bodies, the scenes, I can never erase them. Even 20 years of law enforcement experience cannot prepare you fully for a day like that day. Every single day since that day I have worked, we have worked as a team to figure out who did this in Pike County, where I have spent my entire life. We have obsessively focused on solving this case. We've been patient when it was painful to be, running down every lead, no matter how small. But it all has brought us to this day. Today we have the answer. Members of one family conspired, planned, carried out, and then allegedly covered up their violent act to wipe out members of another family. They did this quickly, coldly, calmly, and very carefully. But not carefully enough.
Sitting in jail, proclaiming their innocence, the specter of COVID-19 dropped onto the world, and the family found themselves incarcerated, separated, and awaiting trial for nearly 2 years. 2 years that proved to be too much for Jake. Jake Wagner cracked under the weight of the silence and admitted to all 23 charges that had been levied against him. He cut a plea deal with the state in exchange for the death penalty not being used against him or his family. He would tell everything. He said that he personally pulled the trigger on 5 of the killings, leaving the other 3 deaths to weigh on the shoulders of his father and brother. He also testified that his mother did not have a hand in the actual killings, but that she had stayed home that night. He did, however, implicate her in the conspiracy, the cover-up, and the forgery of the custody documents. With his plea deal, Jake will serve 8 concurrent life sentences for his crimes with no chance at parole. Angela will serve a 30-year sentence for her role. Both Billy and George are undergoing trials for these crimes at the time of this story. Both have refused to admit their guilt. Text messages obtained from the night of the killings corroborated in part his story of the pretext for the meeting of Billy Wagner and Chris Roden Sr. The weapons, hidden in the cement anchors, were recovered and broken from their molds. Bullets matching those recovered from the bodies were found in random trees on the back portion of the Wagner's property, along with the remnants of the burned-out homemade suppressor, like those found with the recovered weapons. It was a long, slow grind, but the wheels of law, if not justice, seemed to have finally caught up with those who murdered the members of the Roden family 6 years ago. Jealousy and rage, conspiracy and lies all have now given way to the survivors, who must carry on however they can. Our thoughts and hopes go with them. This audio recording was made in the evening of January 11th, 2019, when Michael Redlick would call 911 to frantically report a woman who posed a danger to herself and to others. Without providing more information, he told the operator that he would call back in 5 minutes, as his attention was drawn away from the call by this dangerous woman. But Michael would never make that second call. In fact, this would be the last call he ever made, and the last anyone would ever hear from Michael, because by the next morning, Michael was dead.
I don't know. chased her to the track to get my home. What's the address of that? 1231 Temple Drive, Winter Park.
What's going on at 1231 Temple Drive?
I believe my husband is deceased.
Okay. And why do you believe he's deceased?
Because he's been, he's stiff and he's been wondering he might have a heart attack, I don't know.
Okay. Did you just find him?
No, actually, it happened last night.
It happened last night?
Correct.
Okay. How old is your husband?
He's 65.
So did you find him this morning? Because I know you said that you believed it happened last night. Did you see him last night? Was he okay or was...
He was not okay last night. We had altercations and he stabbed himself and I ran into the bathroom and then when I came out I tried to help him and I thought he was just lying in blood. And I tried to help him and I couldn't. Correct, yes. And then I tried to help him, and I woke up sitting up next to him, and I was trying to figure out what to do.
Right. So you all had an altercation last night, correct?
Yeah.
Alright. Are there any weapons on scene now?
A knife.
A knife?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Danielle, let me ask you this. So did he stab himself last night and he passed last night and you just didn't know what to do?
Correct, I believe so, yes.
Okay. Were you all drinking?
He was. And altercation was the night before too, but I left the house and took my children with me because he was drinking them too.
Mm-hmm. Were your kids there last night during this altercation?
No, they were not. They were not here, and they're not here now.
I know you first said that you thought he had a heart attack. So do you think it was a heart attack, or do you think it was due to the stabbing that he passed away?
Probably the stabbing triggered it, I guess. I don't know. It's a shoulder wound.
You say it's the shoulder wound?
Right.
How old are you, hon?
I'm 45.
The next morning, Michael's wife, Danielle Redlick, made this call to report Michael's death. When she was asked about what had happened, she would describe an altercation that had taken place the night before, and she states that she thinks her husband may have stabbed himself. But what left investigators puzzled was the fact that Michael had been killed more than 11 hours before the call was made. And as the events of that night were exposed, we would come to learn much about Danielle and Michael's twisted relationship. But what would ultimately be revealed would be more shocking and unexpected than anyone could have predicted. Was this a case of a battered woman protecting herself, or was it cold-blooded murder? Before we begin, we would like to send our sincere condolences to the friends and loved ones of Michael Redlick, who fell victim to the abominable acts described in this case. Danielle Redlick was born in 1976 in Florida. Despite her mother and father separating when she was young, her early years were spent in a loving and safe home. Danielle attended the University of Central Florida, where she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Interdisciplinary Studies, majoring in communication. She went on to complete psychology papers and a photography certification. Danielle was, by all accounts, an intelligent and ambitious woman. When Danielle was around 22 years old, her mother Kathleen met Michael Redlick. Michael was known as Red by his friends, given his last name. He was a nice guy with a big smile and an even bigger heart. It was his generosity and kindness that initially attracted Kathleen. The couple seemed content together, and by all accounts, their relationship was a happy one. He was supportive and encouraging to Kathleen. Michael loved being sort of a stepfather to Kathleen's children, as he had none of his own. Even though he and Kathleen were not traditionally married, Michael fit in well to the fatherly and husbandly role for Kathleen's family. 2 of Danielle's siblings lived with the couple, while the other 3 lived with their father. By now, Danielle was living away at college, but she would regularly visit her mother, her siblings, and her stepfather, Michael. While Michael was a qualified lawyer in the years before he met Kathleen, he experienced great success as a businessman. During his relationship with Kathleen, he held a number of executive positions in professional sports organizations such as the Cleveland Browns and the Cleveland Cavaliers. But in 1997, tragedy struck when Danielle's mother, Kathleen, was diagnosed with advanced breast cancer. Kathleen, Michael, and the 6 children were devastated. Not only did they face losing their mother, but they were also in no financial position to pay for her treatment. With her humble background, Kathleen didn't have the funds to pay for her own health care. But Michael wasn't going to give up on Kathleen without a fight, and he decided their best course of action was to get married so Kathleen could be entitled to his own health care benefits. With his executive position, his health care package would cover all expenses related to treating Kathleen's cancer, and once she was cured, they could continue on as normal. They had been together just 2 years. Kathleen loved Michael deeply, but they both knew their shotgun marriage was one of convenience in hopes that the modern healthcare system would help save her life. But devastatingly, Kathleen's breast cancer had progressed to stage 4. Despite trying every available treatment, Kathleen was told she only had months to live. Just months after getting married, Kathleen sadly passed away from the terrible illness. Danielle had been very close to her mom, and she was devastated by her death and worried about how her siblings would cope with losing their mother. Michael was left to care for her 2 younger siblings who had been living with him and Kathleen. He reached out to Danielle and asked if she wanted to move into one of the spare rooms of the house that he had lived in with Kathleen. He hoped that Danielle could be a mother figure to her younger sister and help her through the loss of Kathleen. Danielle's sister was in the final year of high school and was traumatized by the loss of her mother. They agreed that having Danielle close by would provide some familiarity and stability while she finished her senior year. Danielle moved in, and initially their relationship revolved around completing the domestic chores for the home and providing emotional support for each other and to Danielle's sister. Michael encouraged Danielle and provided career guidance. His many years of experience in business put him at an advantageous position to guide Danielle as she set out into the working world. As Danielle began to rely on Michael more and more for emotional support, their relationship changed from amicable and fatherly to romantic and sexual. Danielle was working as a part-time bartender while she studied, and as their relationship began to change, Michael would show up during her shifts. He would order a drink and they would chat while Danielle served the other customers. Soon, Michael began to take Danielle out with him to various activities and events. Initially, it seemed innocent enough, and Danielle thought of it more as bonding. That was until Michael began buying Danielle gifts and spending more time with her than anyone else. Danielle had become infatuated with him, and when Michael introduced Danielle to one of his business contacts, she secured her first professional job, and she felt indebted to him. Over a period of months, their once platonic stepfather-stepdaughter relationship turned into something much more physical. Soon, they were in a full-on romantic relationship. It was Danielle's first experience with a long-term relationship, and she truly believed she was in love with him. But she was smart enough to know that given Michael's history as her stepfather, her friends and family would struggle to accept them as a couple. So initially, Danielle and Michael decided not to make their relationship status public for fear of public criticism. By then, Michael had secured a position as the executive vice president of the NBA basketball team, the Memphis Grizzlies. This meant he would need to move from Cleveland to Memphis. When he first raised the issue of the move to Danielle and asked her to go with him, she declined. She knew moving with Michael would mean that her family would find out about their relationship. While they had been romantically involved for 2 years, she wasn't sure she was ready for that level of scrutiny. She supported Michael moving and decided that instead of moving with him, she would just visit frequently until she felt ready to go public with their relationship. When Michael moved to Memphis, he would fly Danielle out to see him every weekend, and she would touch down at the airport. Michael would pick her up and take her on a whirlwind romantic date before she had to return back to her normal life with her sister in Cleveland.
He took me to a place called Mud Island, where it's a beautiful neighborhood on the Mississippi River in Memphis. And he pulled up to a home and he went inside and he said, "I bought this for us." And it was a beautiful house, it had a pool, and it was on the river. And so from there, I went ahead and made the decision to go ahead and move to Memphis.
So you're there on a visit and he told you that he'd already bought a home for you?
Yes.
Or for you together?
Right.
At this point, how was the relationship?
It was good. I mean, like I said, odd circumstances how we came together, but it was good. We enjoyed our time together.
And how did the rest of the family view this at that point?
I think the sister that was living with us, I think she took it kind of hard, which I don't blame her. I think people were a little bit shocked, but other than that, didn't have much to say about it.
On one such visit, Michael drove Danielle to a beautiful home in the suburbs of Memphis. As they pulled up outside, he declared that he had purchased the home for her and wanted her to leave Cleveland and join him once and for all. Danielle was flattered and agreed to move out to live with Michael full-time. In a new city with new surroundings, they could finally be seen as a legitimate couple. With their newfound freedom, they decided to formalize their relationship, and in the early 2000s, the couple got married. There was no hiding from the criticism of friends and family, but the newlyweds presented themselves as a loving and dedicated couple determined to prove the cynics wrong. But even with their newfound freedom and determination to succeed, Danielle and Michael's relationship was far from perfect. Danielle was new to a long-term relationship, while Michael, who was 21 years older than her, had years of experience. He maintained a position of seniority over Danielle throughout their marriage. While Danielle was trying to make her own way in the professional world, Michael was already successful and had an established career. But the couple seemed to overcome their difficulties and went on to have 2 children together, who they named Jaden and Sawyer. Michael took to fatherhood just as he had with Danielle's siblings. He was a hands-on father, and despite the pressures of his professional role, he was able to support the children in any way he could. But as time went on and the children reached high school age, Danielle began to notice that Michael wasn't as romantic or as available as he had once been. She suspected he was cheating on her, and when she confronted him about it, her worst fears were confirmed. Michael admitted that he had been cheating on her. Despite the hurt and betrayal of infidelity, and on top of everything that had already happened between the couple, Danielle wanted to provide her children with a stable home, unlike what she had been raised in. So Danielle decided to stay with Michael and try to put their problems behind them. And in an effort to save their marriage, the couple agreed to therapy, both together and separately. But the damage had already been done. The trust was gone and the couple fought often. Their frequent screaming matches soon turned into physical fights, and often their 2 young children would be witnesses as their parents kicked and scratched at each other. The home was filled with tension and discomfort for everyone, and Danielle was faced with a hard choice: to stay or to go. Danielle decided that she had had enough of Michael's ongoing infidelity and their endless fights. Eventually, the couple would separate and begin living their lives in separate homes. Michael was furious and began to turn against Danielle. He threatened that he would stop paying the bills on the home that they had once shared, and he cut Danielle off from being able to access their joint accounts. He told her he would go for full custody of the children and kick her out of the house that he was paying for, forcing her to return to Cleveland. And yet, Michael also claimed he wanted to reconcile. He told Danielle that if she let him move back in, he would continue to pay for everything. After a few months of separation, in 2018, Danielle filed for divorce. But the judge in the case rejected the divorce filing as Michael had not been properly served with the papers. Michael had managed to dodge the process servers on a number of occasions. On one occasion, he visited Danielle and begged her for one more chance to fix their marriage for the sake of their children. He promised he would change, and Danielle believed him. As the server turned up to deliver the papers to Michael, the couple were engaged in relations. Once again, Michael had avoided being served, and this time it was with Danielle's help. As they attempted to reconcile their marriage, Michael began to invite Danielle over for dinner at his condo. He started to take her on dates again and lavished her with gifts and expensive restaurants. Danielle was confused by the status of their relationship. In her mind, they were separated, and both were trying to rebuild their relationship. At the same time, she was suspicious that Michael had an ulterior motive or was potentially still seeing other women. When she stumbled across a letter Michael had written, Danielle's confusion turned to anger.
How do you feel at this point? After reviewing that, what's your mindset?
I'm shook up by it because I was surprised that he was saying this when we were clearly trying to get on better. And
So what you're seeing there matching the interactions that you were having with your husband?
no,
After observing that, after having this experience, did you speak with Michael about it? Did you confront him about what you had found?
yes, I asked him about it.
And is that what leads to this email exchange?
Yes.
But could it have been this anger that led her to commit murder? Or had the years of conflict and abuse led Danielle to reaching a breaking point, leaving her with no choice but to defend herself against an attack by Michael? Michael and Danielle had been together for 18 years. They had been married 15 years when Michael died on the night of January 12, 2019. After Danielle's call, police arrived and it was immediately clear that Michael was dead and had been for some time. Rather than dying from a heart attack, authorities could see clearly that Michael had been stabbed to death. He was lying in a pool of his own blood, which looked as if it had been recently disturbed. There were bloody towels strewn across the floor in the vicinity of the body and throughout the home. The home smelled of cleaning products, and it looked like Michael's body was recently moved due to smears of blood on the floor. Danielle was in a frantic state when the police arrived, and she was taken to a psychiatric ward where she could be assessed for risk of self-harm. Meanwhile, an investigation began, and the family home was cordoned off as a crime scene.
Refer to everything we see here as suspected blood because you haven't done some tests to actually truly confirm it's blood.
That is true.
But it's a pretty strong suspicion.
Yes.
When Danielle was released from the psychiatric ward, she returned home. Michael's autopsy showed that he had died from a single stab wound to the chest, and that he would have died within 5 or 6 minutes of sustaining the injury. These facts did not line up with Danielle's version of events, and now she was considered a prime suspect for murder. A search warrant was carried out on Danielle's home, and she continued to deny that she had murdered her husband. Based on police interviews with Danielle and her strange behavior and demeanor after the fight with her husband, she was charged with second-degree murder. Despite having offered a plea deal to plead guilty to manslaughter in exchange for a reduced sentence of 10 years, Danielle decided to take the case to trial. And it was during that trial that the disturbing details of what happened inside their suburban home finally came to light. According to Danielle, she was in the fight for her life. There was no denying that she was the one who stabbed Michael, but her entire case rested on a claim of self-defense.
Ms. Redlick, on January 11th, 2019, did you stab your husband?
I did. Yes.
Pushing her to the ground.
And then did she get up?
Yes.
What did he do next, according to Ms. Redlick?
Pushed her head against the stove and began like covering her mouth with her face with his hands, yelling and screaming at her.
So can you kind of describe what you understood her to be saying Mr. Redlick was doing with his hand?
Like just covering, like smushing his hands over her mouth.
Okay. She was not describing being choked.
Correct, she wasn't.
Did she say whether or not Mr. Redlick struck her at any point during the sequence of events?
No, just smudged his hand against her face, but like that.
Okay.
Like smudged it.
Like was rubbing his fist on her?
Yeah, like rubbing. Mm-hmm.
You're face to face with Miss Redlick, right?
Yes.
Nothing covering her face?
Right.
Did you observe any injuries on her?
She detailed how their relationship was mostly great, but the incidents of domestic abuse had started long before they moved to Memphis, and before she found out about Michael's infidelity.
I remember I made an offensive comment, which I wouldn't make today. I called it, I said at least he wasn't Jewish and cheap. And he backhanded me in the face, in the mouth, and my mouth started bleeding and my nose started bleeding. And we were in the car at this point. And so when I got to the red light, I wanted to get out of the car. And he grabbed me and I grabbed him back, and we kind of just went back and forth in the car. And we actually got pulled over.
She shared how Michael's behavior got progressively worse, especially when he drank.
He was coming home from work every day and he was pretty agitated. Something was really bothering him. I just remember that it was something, had to do with something with two of his bosses. And he was coming home and he was pouring a drink each night. And I was still pretty young at that point, so I grew up in a house where you eat dinner every night. And I noticed that Michael, when he would drink, he would skip dinner. And so he was doing this by the third night. I started to wonder, are you gonna keep doing this? I think I'm just gonna go ahead. If you're not gonna eat dinner, I'm just gonna go down to the river. There's some, a city walk where they have some shops and eateries and stuff. And when I said that, he got irritated and said, "What, are you mad because I don't want to have dinner with you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, kind of at this point, because," I said, "how's the wallowing working out for you?" I said something sarcastic, and I went to head to the door to leave, and he was near the door, and he moved in front of the door. And I tried to shove past him, and I feel like at that point he raises his fist and he just crossed me in the face, and I feel like, I don't know, like he took out every frustration that he had that week on me. And the next thing I remember was actually laying in his lap, and he was stroking me and he was apologizing, he was crying, and I had looked down and I had blood all over me, and he was telling me how sorry he was, that he's gonna take me out to a nice dinner tomorrow, and he wanted to go ahead and take care of me, let him take care of me that night.
Witnesses also shared their experiences of the extensive history of the volatile relationship between Michael and Danielle. There are incidents which were reported to the police, and evidence of Michael being prescribed testosterone and a medication for erectile dysfunction. He had become increasingly frustrated and insecure about his poor performance in the bedroom, and he would verbalize his fears that Danielle would want to leave him because of these issues. His insecurity meant that what was once purely physical violence turned into sexual aggression.
He was going to be going out of town for a work function for the week, and so he called me from work the day before and said, "I'm going to bring home some movies and dinner. We're going to spend some time together tonight." And I said, "Okay." So he brought home dinner and alcohol, and we started watching the movie, and there was a love scene. And this happened often. I noticed he would get flustered and kind of start acting strange. And during this particular movie, he approached me and he was aggressive, and he was hurting me. So I moved to a separate couch, and I told him that wasn't okay. And he just continued to drink through the movie, and he passed out about halfway through, and I finished the movie. And at that point, I just went upstairs to bed. I turned everything off, and I let him know that I was going up to bed. He was snoring. I didn't wake him up, so I went up to bed, and the next morning, he had to leave, get ready to go out of town, and he came upstairs into the bedroom. He said, "Why didn't you wake me up last night?"
So when he says that, how does it continue from there?
So I'm in my bathroom at that point, and I'm brushing my teeth, and we're having this conversation, and the next thing I know, something hits me in the back of the head, and I look, and there's a box of tampons on the floor. And I said, "Did you just hit me with that?" And he said, "Yeah, are you calling me a USSY?" And I said, "No, what are you talking about?" And he said that I had left the box of tampons on his side of the sink. What was I trying to say? And this just was very strange to me. And I said, "I don't know, they just happened to be there. I didn't do that on purpose. Didn't clean up the bathroom, I'm sorry." And I was upset. And I said, "Maybe you are acting like that, a BUSSY." And I walked away from him. And
How did he react when you walked away?
he said that he came up behind me and grabbed me from behind and started choking me. And I had never been choked that hard before by him.
You did this a second ago. Can you show the jury how, with your hands, do a demonstration?
His forearm, he just came up behind me and yanked me really hard and pulled me close to his body, and to the point where I couldn't breathe. He cut off my air, and basically he was choking me out. I started to pass out. I remember falling, and I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, is he gonna kill me? And I remember reaching up, and I fell to my knees, and the next thing I know, I was sort of aware, and I was looking up at him, and he was just staring at me with this like surprised expression on his face. And he reached out his hand and he said, "I'm sorry." And I just crawled away from him into a corner, and I was really frightened at that point, and I couldn't believe it.
From Danielle's perspective and from witness testimony given by their children, the marriage and life inside the family home was toxic. Both parents were to blame for the behavior, which would be particularly bad when either of them had consumed alcohol. Michael had moved back into the family home just 1 month prior to his death. Danielle claimed this was after she had given in to his demands to return so that she didn't lose custody of her children. But she was realistic about the fact that it was unlikely their marriage would continue much longer. During the time she had filed for divorce, she had begun setting up profiles for herself on dating sites. Despite never meeting with any of the men from the sites, she had exchanged messages with multiple men, and she claimed that the reason they fought the night of Michael's death was that he had discovered one of those messages on her phone. This infuriated Michael when he discovered the messages. At the time, Danielle was out of the house for a brief moment after going to McDonald's for dinner, but when she returned, she would find Michael intoxicated, and in that drunken state, he would come at her violently.
And around 10 p.m., she goes to McDonald's. After McDonald's, she heads home. And Michael is there. He is pounding down the vodka. He grabs her food, and then he goes at her. He is in a rage, and this rage is the angriest that she has ever seen him. It's worse than any of those other incidents. It's different. He pushes her down. She goes to her knees. He pulls her up by the hair. He shoves her to the kitchen island. He chokes. He smothers her. She reaches into a drawer. She grabs a knife. She stabs him 1 time. He is stunned. He releases her, and she runs to the bathroom.
When it came time to testify to her version of events leading to Michael's death, Danielle calmly described what happened on the night of January 11th, 2019.
You find the knife. You're able to open the drawer?
Yes.
You're able to grab the knife?
Yes.
How does it continue from there?
Pulled the knife out, and I don't know if he saw it, but he released my head, so I'm able to move.
And how do you position? So you said that you're able to move a little bit. What position do you go into?
Slightly more to the left, turning toward him.
Does he back away from you?
No.
Go ahead.
He says, "What, are you going to stab me?" And I take the knife and I position it and face it toward him.
What does he do at that point?
He immediately just goes for my chin and hits me back. And I stab him at that point.
How are you positioned at the point of stabbing him?
Basically on the back of the island. And been pinned by him.
At that point, are you able to get out?
After I stab him, yes.
prior to doing that, prior to stabbing him with a knife? Are you able to remove yourself?
No.
Are you able to wiggle free?
No.
Are you able to get out without using a weapon?
No, I was trying.
Are you able to talk to him?
The defense rested on claims of years of a toxic and abusive marriage in which Danielle was driven to violence, the act which would end Michael's life. The prosecution, in turn, would also build a solid case against Danielle, accusing her of second-degree murder. From their perspective, the evidence painted a picture of a callous and cold-hearted woman that would say anything to get away with murder. They claimed she wasn't defending herself when she murdered Michael. Rather, she intentionally attacked him as payback for his infidelity. They claimed she was trying to find the easiest way out of their marriage and into the arms of a lover. They questioned every statement she made in relation to the events of that night.
You have told this jury that he has taken a bite of your hamburger, correct?
Yes.
And then he spits it at you,
Yes.
right? It's at this point that you stand up and you grab that McDonald's bag and such, and you begin to throw it on the counter or the island, right?
Right.
Mr. Redlick is behind you.
Yes.
And you feel yourself get hit in the head.
He grabs me and I fall. Then I get hit in the head.
I thought you stumbled.
Yeah, well, he grabbed me first, which I tried to turn, and then I tripped up on my feet and fell.
So you fall, and then it's while you are still on the ground that you feel something hit your head.
Yes.
Could you tell if it was an object or a fist or something else?
Elbow, fist, I don't know what it was.
But not like a blunt object like a bat or a mallet.
I didn't think it was an object, no.
It's at that point that you are pulled back up by your hair? Is that what happens next?
Well, I attempted to get up on my own, and he was too far on top of me, so...
Where are you at when he's now too far on top of you?
Coming up, trying to get up off the ground.
Where specifically? Where specifically, or is he too far on top of you to get on top of you?
So am I using this?
Permission to allow us to use the laser pointer gun?
Yes, that's fine.
I need to turn it off for you. Put the laser pointer to where you were whenever he was too far on top of you for you to get up, please.
I'm in this corridor between here and here.
Okay. So,
Facing that way. On my knees.
on your knees, facing towards the cabinets on the far wall where the scale is at. Yes? And when you say he's too on top of you to get up, is he actually standing? He's standing over you at this point?
Yes.
And is it this point that he picks you up and by the hair?
No, I'm going to get up like this, and I don't know where exactly he's at, but I know his head slammed into my head.
So as you're getting up, you feel your head on his head.
I feel the back of my head on his head.
Then it's at that point that he takes your head and he slams it onto the stovetop area. Yes?
I wouldn't say right at that point, no. I reached up and with my right hand to pull myself up. And as I'm pulling myself up and trying to turn around to face him, that's when he grabbed my hair and slammed my head onto the...
Slams your head into the stovetop, yes?
Yes.
And at this point, you have a 6'1", 240-pound man pressed against your body, yes?
Yes.
Pressing you against that island.
Yes.
The next thing that you say happens is that he begins to take his fist and he's rubbing it in your face. That was your story, right?
Took my head and he held it down. It was a very awkward position. I couldn't move because it was hurting, and yes, he had me pinned, so he held my head down first.
So your neck is sort of like cricked against the corner of that island at that point?
Yes.
Now he's using his force to keep your head down.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And he is still on top of you. His 240-pound body is still pressing you into that island.
Yes.
You can feel the items on your body.
Yes.
This is when the rubbing happens?
Yes.
'Cause he doesn't hit you.
He doesn't punch me, no. Well, he hit me in the back of the head, but
In the back, where your hair covers, correct?
yes.
On the skin that's exposed, he doesn't strike. And then is it at this moment that he decides that he's gonna put his hands over your nose and mouth?
Yes.
The prosecution had a lot of questions for Danielle, asserting that her excuses and explanations didn't add up to self-defense. The fact that Danielle had waited 11 hours before calling 911 was highly suspicious. Why would an innocent victim wait so long to call for help? The delay meant she missed the opportunity to save Michael's life. Danielle claimed that after she had stabbed him and gotten away from his grasp, she hid in the bathroom after their fight because she was scared for her life and didn't know Michael was dying. The prosecution also pointed out her statements on the 911 call that Michael had had a heart attack, and her second explanation that he had stabbed himself during the fight, statements that were admittedly untrue. But Danielle excused her lies by saying that she was in a state of shock immediately after the stabbing and couldn't process her thoughts correctly. She told the court that she was scared and confused and didn't know what to say when she called 911. But there were still more questions to be answered. Investigators found deleted texts on Danielle's phone which she sent while Michael lay dead on the kitchen floor. Her phone also showed evidence of a dating site being accessed while Michael lay there dying on the floor after being stabbed. The prosecution claimed this proved that she couldn't have been in so much shock that she was unable to function and call 911 to get him some help. The prosecution called on Jaden, one of the couple's daughters, to testify. Though her face could not be shown due to her age at the time, Jaden revealed that Danielle was not the victim at home. Rather, she was the instigator of the couple's fights. She further described Danielle as toxic and manipulative. In contrast, she had a very close relationship with her father, whom she described as attentive and loving.
Jaden says, my dad and I were very close. We practically did everything together. He took me out on daddy-daughter dates all the time. We were very close. I told him everything. Prosecutor, what was your relationship like with your mother? Jaden, very toxic, very manipulative. Prosecutor, what was the relationship like between your parents? Jaden, very toxic, tumultuous, very rocky. Yeah, it was not a good relationship, very rocky. Prosecutor, who was the primary source? Jaden, my mother. Prosecutor, why do you say that? Jaden, if there was an issue between them, it would be brought up by my mother. Jaden, when he came home, he was very distant. And this is what she's talking about, I believe, the night of. Not very talkative. He was very cold when he came home. Prosecutor, did you sense tension? Jaden, yes. Prosecutor, did it turn into an argument? Jaden, yes. It was very rare for me to see him get angry and upset. That night, he told me he was sorry, that he loved me, and he wished I hadn't seen him like that. The next day, I went to school, and those were the last words we ever exchanged. I didn't answer him then. Jaden, the last thing I said to him was when they were arguing the night before. Jaden, I received a text from my mom saying she was dealing with something here and that it was best for me to stay at my friend's another night. I thought that was odd because my mom usually wanted to pick me up right after a sleepover. Prosecutor, when was the next time you spoke to your mother? Jaden, sometime later that week. I believe she called me from the hospital. Prosecutor, did she tell you what happened to your father? And this is important, folks. Listen, Jaden, no, I don't think so. Prosecutor, did you later ask her what happened to your father? Jaden, I remember her exact words were, the autopsy said he had a heart attack. Prosecutor, I have no other questions for this witness.
When the prosecution rested its case, it was not clear how the jury would find in the matter. Both the defense and prosecution had painted vastly different pictures of Danielle Redlich and her motives for stabbing Michael and covering up the crime. Both sides admitted that the marriage had been toxic and unhappy for a number of years. But it was up to the jury to decide whether they believed the testimony of a battered woman who felt she was driven to murder in order to save her own life, or would they side with the prosecution who presented the voice of a victim who could no longer defend himself. Did they believe that he was struck down by a deceitful and calculating murderess who was only concerned for herself? The trial broadcast internationally, and internet forums were divided on how the jury would find the case. After just 2 days of deliberations, the courtroom was completely silent when the verdict was read.
In the Circuit Court of the 9th Judicial Circuit in and for Orange County, Florida, case number 2019 CF 18460, State of Florida versus Danielle Justine Redland. Verdict as to count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. So say we all. Signed, juror badge number 283, foreperson.
In response to the acquittal, Danielle and Michael's daughter Jaden gave an emotional statement to the court, which was read by her attorney.
I want to start this off by saying the only reason I am not personally reading the statement to you all myself is because I simply do not ever want to be in a room with Daniel Drohan ever again. I feel as though there has been absolutely no justice served from my father or his family, including myself and my younger brother. It takes a lot for me to talk about these things and be so vulnerable in front of total strangers. So I please just ask that you all listen to me and please take my feelings into consideration. Since I was about 7 years old, I have endured insane amounts of trauma. This trauma all stems from the same thing, Danielle Drohan. And yes, I'm referring to her as her first name and maiden name because I feel as though she should not even have the privilege of having the same last name as me or my father. I refuse to call her mother because she was never a decent mother figure to me. There were a great deal of things I was not permitted to say in court when I was testifying, which I feel is absolutely insane. I still am unable to even scratch the mere surface of the trauma I am referring to. All I want is justice for my father. It breaks my heart into a million pieces over and over to hear people side with such an abusive, horrible person and then continue to bash on a dead man who isn't here to defend himself. Sure, my dad was no angel and definitely had faults, but he was the kindest, most caring person, and I'm sure the other people who had the chance to know him would vouch for that. He was so kind, gentle, and he never laid a hand on a single person in my family, not myself, Sawyer, or Danielle. I don't even remember him spanking me. My dad always advocated for love and acceptance. He loved everyone and treated everyone the way he wanted to be treated. He was a great man with great values and loved his family. He would never hit a woman. He took my brother and I to so many different ball games, always took me out on our father-daughter days, and he was always in a good mood. Him and I used to watch Saturday Night Live together every Saturday for 5 years straight. He took me and Sawyer to the movies all the time and made sure we were always happy, fed, and well taken care of. He always stood up for others. He always wanted to joke around and play whatever game or talk about literally anything. He loved to talk, people watch, and get to know people. He loved others, and everyone loved him. He was not a bad person. I am so angry about the way he has been portrayed, so extremely angry. He was the best dad I ever could have asked for. I remember at certain points, I would imagine Sawyer and I staying with him full time if my parents were to divorce. I have no regret and saying that, and I mean it wholeheartedly. It absolutely breaks my heart into a million pieces that Sawyer has to grow up without him. I do too, but Sawyer no longer has the amazing dad to show him how to grow up and be just like him. We are both extremely heartbroken to have our pops ripped from our world so suddenly and to have been lied to about it for so long after. We miss our pops so much. I would do anything to bring him back. Someone took him from our world and ruined our childhoods, let alone the start of our lives and futures. We have endured so much since he was taken from us that it has been difficult to process a natural grieving process. We have suffered such incredible amounts of trauma to the point where our bodies have reacted to it. I have had nightmares for the past 3 years about Danielle, and more specifically about certain decisions she has made. Sawyer has nightmares too. I have developed a near fear of being murdered. I have had phases of extreme paranoia, and I've gone through phases where I've been so depressed over the situation that I was unable to take care of myself for a long time. I've lost a great amount of weight, and for a while, I would get extremely triggered and break down over someone even saying the words dad or parent. I've had an entire school gossip about me and my situation, as most of Winter Park. People recognize my last name and often already know about this so-called news story that is my life. I lost everything at once, and it was broadcasted to the world, and I have always given the short end of the stick. I am just now getting to be okay again, but this reopened so many wounds that I genuinely thought could start to heal from. You may all be fooled by the incredible mask this woman presents to you all, but I am not. My father did not get away in time. I am not worried. I am so worried for my brother. Judge, please make some kind of stipulation that Danielle not be allowed near myself and Sawyer, so we don't have to be re-traumatized like we have been already. We're both settled into our new life without our dad, and we want to be left in peace. It took us a while to get here, and we deserve that at the very least.
While Danielle was acquitted of murder, she still faced sentencing for the other crimes of which she had been found guilty. She was due to be sentenced for tampering with evidence, as investigators had proven she had cleaned up the blood and moved Michael's body after his death.
According to the crime scene pictures and evidence, bloodstains were smeared throughout the home. You used bleach and other cleaners to clean what looked like a horror scene. Crime scene photographs also showed where you left the cleanup towels and a bucket of colored water. The blood pattern expert testified that typically blood patterns could tell a story or explain the circumstances surrounding a homicide crime scene like this, but not so in your case. The expert also testified that as a result of your conduct, it was virtually impossible to determine the exact circumstances surrounding Michael Redmond's death. The scene was tampered with so much so that the blood evidence was of little to no value to determine what happened between the night of January 11th of 2019 and mid-morning, January 12th, 2019. You've already been adjudicated guilty of count 2, tampering with physical evidence. And so for that conduct, I will sentence you to 364 days in the Orange County Jail with credit for 364 days time served. That's going to be followed by a period of 12 months of probation. You will report to probation by 3 p.m. The office is on the 7th floor inside courtroom 7B. Within the first 30 days, you will sign up for and you will submit to a mental health evaluation and complete the evaluation and any required treatment within 12 months. I will impose court costs, and there is also a public defender lien that should be imposed.
Court cost of $418.
Mr. Parnell and Ms. Conlon, public defender lien, what do you feel is an appropriate cost for your services for the trial and the litigation?
On January 18th, 2022, Danielle was released from the Orange County Jail after having served nearly 1,100 days behind bars while she awaited her trial. Today's case examines the brutal double homicide of a young couple in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The case was unusual, with a friend claiming to overhear the start of the attack over the phone.
County 911. Oh my God, we just called the police here. I'm lying. Yes, we need a rescue squad. He's got a big hole in his head.
And as the investigation unfolded, it seemed that many of those closest to the couple were unwilling to share what they knew with police.
Did he sound like he was out of breath?
No.
Did he sound like he was scared or nervous?
No.
Did he sound like he knew them people?
That's why I said I think that whoever did it, he knew.
It would take nearly a year for investigators to sift through the web of lies and half-truths before an arrest could be made. Yet 10 years later, questions remain. Do police really have their killer? And who else was involved? This is the disturbing case of Johnny Clark and Lisa Straub.